Ethan had always lived a simple life. He wasn't the type to seek out adventure or thrill. A mechanic by trade, he spent most of his days fixing machines and equipment for the small colony on the outskirts of the space station. The job wasn't glamorous, but it kept him busy, and that was enough for him. The colony was quiet, far from the bustling cities, and even farther from the conflict and excitement of the wider galaxy. Ethan liked it that way. But one morning, everything changed. A ship appeared in the sky, different from anything Ethan had ever seen before. It was sleek, shimmering under the light of the distant stars, and it moved with an elegance that caught Ethan's attention immediately. The ship didn't belong to anyone in the colony. It wasn't one of the regular supply ships or the occasional travelers who passed through. This was something new, something strange. As the ship descended, a feeling of unease spread through the colony. People gathered outside, staring up at the unfamiliar vessel. It wasn't long before the ship touched down, landing gracefully in a nearby clearing. The hum of its engines slowly faded as it settled on the ground. Ethan, curious but cautious, decided to investigate. He grabbed his toolkit and walked toward the landing site, hoping to get a closer look. When he reached the clearing, the last thing he expected to see was a woman stepping out of the ship. She was tall, graceful, and beautiful beyond words. Her skin was a soft shade of pale blue, and her long white hair flowed gently in the wind. She wore a simple but elegant outfit that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. There was a calmness about her, a quiet power that drew Ethan's attention immediately. She noticed him standing at the edge of the clearing, and her eyes met his. They were a bright, glowing shade of violet, deep and mesmerizing. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine, but it wasn't fear. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or fascination. She smiled at him, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. Her presence was calming, but at the same time, she seemed like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Hello, human," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "I am Lyra. I have come to offer you something." Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. "Offer me something?" he asked, his voice rough from the surprise. Lyra nodded, her smile never fading. "Yes, if you come with me, I will make you very happy." The words hung in the air between them, and Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. She seemed genuine, but her offer was too strange to be believed. Why would someone like her, someone so clearly different from him, make such a promise? He had no idea what kind of life she led, what kind of world she came from, or what her motives were. He opened his mouth to ask more questions, but she raised a hand, silencing him gently. "You may have many questions, but the only way to understand is to come with me." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't someone who took risks. He had always played it safe, sticking to what he knew. But something about Lyra, something about the way she spoke, made it hard to ignore her offer. It was almost like she was calling to him, urging him to step out of his comfort zone and embrace the unknown. He glanced back at the colony behind him. It was quiet, peaceful, and everything he had ever known. But in that moment, it felt small and distant. He didn't know what awaited him if he accepted Lyra's offer, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the chance for something more, something bigger, something that might change his life forever. With a deep breath, Ethan took a step forward. "What do you mean by happy?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. Lyra's smile grew, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimpse of something else in her eyes. Determination, maybe even desperation. "I can show you a world beyond your wildest dreams, human," she said. "All you have to do is come with me." Ethan felt his heart race. There was no going back now. He had made his decision. What happened next would depend on whether he had the courage to take the leap. Ethan stood there for a moment, his heart pounding. The strange woman, Lyra, still smiled at him, her violet eyes glimmering with an unknown promise. Her words echoed in his mind. "If you come with me, I will make you very happy." They were simple words, yet they held something powerful, something he couldn't quite understand. He wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear that made his pulse race, but one thing was certain. He had never been offered anything like this before. He glanced back at the colony. The small, quiet place he had always called home. It was peaceful, safe, and predictable, but it felt empty. Everything was the same every day, and nothing ever changed. Ethan wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't fulfilled either. He longed for something more, something he couldn't put into words. Was this strange woman offering him that something? Ethan's mind raced. "Who are you, really?" he asked, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but the uncertainty was clear in his eyes. Lyra's smile never wavered. She took a small step forward, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. "I am from a far-off world," she said, her voice soft and smooth, almost as if she were singing. "My people are in need, and I believe you can help us. But it's not just that. I can show you a life unlike anything you've ever known, a life full of wonder, excitement, and adventure." Ethan frowned. "I'm just a mechanic," he said. "I fix machines. What could someone like me possibly do for you?" Lyra's expression softened. "You have skills that can help us, but more than that, you have something no one on my planet has seen before, a fresh perspective, a human perspective. Your kind has something special, something my people desperately need." Ethan was puzzled. "What do you mean by something special?" he asked. He still didn't fully trust her, but his curiosity was beginning to outweigh his doubts. Lyra's eyes sparkled, as if she knew she was getting closer to convincing him. "Your way of thinking, your creativity, your strength," she said. "On my world, everything is controlled, calculated. We've lost our ability to think freely, to dream. You, human, you have the power to help us break free from the rules that bind us." Ethan wasn't sure if he understood, but the way Lyra spoke made it sound so important, so urgent. His curiosity deepened, but so did his confusion. "Why me?" he asked again. "Why not someone else?" Lyra took a step closer, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a sudden pull, as if the air between them had shifted. "Because you're different," she said softly. "I've seen many humans, but you are the one who stands out. You have a quiet strength about you, a spark. I believe you can help my people see beyond their limitations." Ethan looked down at his hands, unsure of what to think. He had always considered himself an ordinary person, someone who was good at fixing things but not much else. How could someone like him possibly make a difference to an entire alien world? And yet there was something about Lyra's words that felt true. He couldn't explain it, but her offer seemed genuine. "I don't know," Ethan said slowly, still uncertain. "This is all so sudden. I've never even thought about leaving here. I'm not sure I can just drop everything and go with you." Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "I understand your hesitation," she said. "It's a big decision, but think about it. You've lived in this place for so long, and every day feels the same. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger, something that could change your life forever. You don't have to decide now, but the offer will always be there." Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't sure if he was ready to leave everything behind, but there was no denying that Lyra's words struck a chord within him. The colony, his job, the routine. It all seemed so small now. Could this strange woman really offer him the adventure he had always secretly craved? After a long pause, Ethan finally spoke. "What's your plan, exactly? What do you need me for?" Lyra smiled again, her eyes full of warmth. "Come with me, and you'll see. But I promise, you won't regret it. I can show you a life full of possibilities, things you've never dreamed of." Ethan hesitated, but his heart told him it was time for something new. Slowly, he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I'll go with you." Lyra's smile widened. "Thank you, Ethan. I promise you will not regret this." As she turned and led the way toward her ship, Ethan followed, his heart pounding with excitement and uncertainty. Whatever lay ahead, he knew his life would never be the same. Ethan followed Lyra as she walked toward her sleek ship, his mind buzzing with a whirlwind of thoughts. He had never considered leaving his quiet life behind. The colony, the routine, the familiar faces, it was all he had known for years. But something about Lyra, her calm confidence and the mysterious offer, made him feel like he was on the verge of something bigger. He hesitated for a moment, looking back at the colony. It seemed so distant now, like something from another life. Ethan had always been content, even if his life had felt small at times. But Lyra had sparked something inside him, a yearning for something more. He couldn't ignore the pull, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Lyra turned to him and smiled, sensing his internal struggle. "It's a big decision," she said, her voice soft and reassuring. "I know it feels like you're stepping into the unknown, but sometimes that's where the greatest adventures begin." Ethan nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. He had always been cautious, always careful. But today, something inside him felt different. Maybe it was the excitement of the unknown, or maybe it was the chance to do something meaningful, something important. For the first time in a long while, he felt alive in a way he couldn't explain. As they boarded the ship, Lyra guided him to a seat near the controls. The interior of the ship was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It was sleek and futuristic, with panels that seemed to glow softly and walls that shimmered with an otherworldly light. The ship hummed to life as Lyra took her place at the controls, her fingers moving with ease over the advanced technology. Ethan sat back in his seat, still trying to process everything. The ship lifted off the ground, rising smoothly into the sky. Through the large windows, Ethan watched as the colony grew smaller, fading into the distance. His heart raced as they passed through the atmosphere, heading toward the stars. Lyra glanced over at him, noticing his wide eyes. "You're not afraid, are you?" she asked with a gentle laugh. Ethan shook his head, though his heart was pounding. "I don't know what I am, but I feel different. Excited, I guess." Lyra smiled. "That's the spirit. Change can be scary, but it's also the beginning of something new. You'll see things you've never imagined before, experience things that will make you feel alive in ways you can't even comprehend." As the ship cruised through space, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The stars outside the windows sparkled like diamonds, and the vastness of the universe stretched out before him. He had always dreamed of traveling beyond the confines of his small colony, but he never thought it would actually happen. And now, here he was, flying through the cosmos with this strange, beautiful woman who had promised to change his life forever. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "I know this all seems sudden, but I'm glad you're with me, Ethan. You're going to help us. You're going to help my people see things differently." Ethan turned to her, confused. "But how? I'm just a mechanic. I don't know anything about your people or your world." Lyra smiled softly, her eyes filled with trust. "That's the beauty of it. You don't need to know everything. You see the world differently than we do. You bring a fresh perspective, a human perspective. It's something my people need, something we've lost. We've been stuck in our ways for too long, and I believe you can help us break free." Ethan wasn't sure if he fully understood, but he could see the conviction in Lyra's eyes. She believed in him. And for some reason, that was enough. Maybe he didn't know what lay ahead, but he had made the decision. There was no turning back now. As the ship continued its journey through space, Ethan realized that this was the beginning of something far greater than he had ever imagined. He had taken the leap, leaving everything behind in search of adventure, and now there was no telling where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts again. "We're not just going on a journey through space, Ethan. We're going to change the course of everything. And I promise you won't regret it." Ethan nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. Whatever came next, he was ready. He had made the choice to follow Lyra, and he was about to find out just how much his life was about to change. The ship sped through the vast emptiness of space, leaving the small colony behind. Ethan sat in his seat, staring out at the stars, his mind still racing from everything that had happened in such a short time. He had gone from fixing machines in a quiet corner of the galaxy to traveling aboard a sleek alien ship, bound for a world he had never seen, with a mysterious woman he barely knew. It all seemed surreal, like something out of a dream. Lyra was at the controls, her fingers effortlessly moving over the glowing panels in front of her. She had explained that her ship was equipped with advanced technology, capable of traveling faster than anything Ethan had ever seen. The stars outside the windows stretched and blurred as they moved at incredible speeds, but despite the rush of the journey, Lyra remained calm and collected. Her confidence was unshakable. Ethan couldn't help but admire her. She wasn't just beautiful, there was something more about her. She carried herself with a grace and strength that he couldn't quite explain. She seemed to know exactly what she was doing, as if she had seen and experienced more than any human could comprehend. But despite her mystery, Ethan felt an odd sense of trust in her. There was a quiet sincerity in her eyes, and somehow it made him believe in her words. As the hours passed, the initial shock of the journey began to wear off. Ethan started to feel a sense of calm, as if the vastness of space somehow put his worries at ease. The loneliness of his old life on the colony felt like a distant memory. He was here now, in the middle of something bigger than anything he could have ever imagined. And while it was intimidating, it also felt right. Lyra noticed the change in Ethan's demeanor. She had been watching him from the corner of her eye as she piloted the ship. He had seemed uncertain at first, but now she could see the spark of curiosity in his eyes. It was exactly what she had hoped for. "You're adjusting well," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but it carried a warmth that made Ethan feel comfortable. Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "It's a lot to take in. I don't know what I expected, but this is different. I've never been this far from home. I didn't think I'd ever leave." Lyra smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the stars outside. "You've taken the first step, Ethan. And that's the hardest part. You'll see, soon enough, why you're here." Ethan nodded, though he still had questions. "Why me, though? You keep saying I can help you and your people, but I don't even know where we're going. What do you need me for?" Lyra's expression softened. She knew that Ethan had doubts, but she also knew he would come to understand soon enough. "My people have been stuck in a cycle for a long time. We've lost something important, something that humans still have. The ability to think freely, to act without fear. You see the world differently, Ethan. Your creativity, your perspective, your willingness to take risks. Those are the things that can help us." Ethan listened carefully, trying to understand. "So you think I can teach your people how to think differently?" he asked, a little skeptical. Lyra nodded. "Yes. You don't see the world through the same lens we do. You're not burdened by the rules and limitations we've placed on ourselves. That's why I believe you can help. You'll bring a new way of thinking that we desperately need." Ethan still wasn't sure if he fully understood, but he could feel the conviction in her words. There was something about the way she spoke that made him believe in her. It wasn't just her confidence. It was the way she seemed to truly care about her people, about changing their future. Ethan had always been a problem solver, and the idea of helping others solve their problems was something he could relate to. As the ship continued its journey through space, Ethan began to wonder about the world they were headed toward. What would it be like? What kind of people lived there? He had so many questions, but he knew that answers would come in time. For now, all he could do was trust Lyra and take each step as it came. Hours passed, and the stars outside the window began to look different. The deep blackness of space was fading into a soft blue, signaling that they were approaching a planet. Ethan leaned forward in his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. They were getting close to her world, the place that had called to him, the place that promised to change everything. Lyra looked at him, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "We're almost there, Ethan. I hope you're ready for what's to come." Ethan nodded, his heart racing with anticipation. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was ready. This was only the beginning, and he couldn't wait to see what came next. The ship descended slowly, cutting through the soft, wispy clouds that surrounded the planet below. Ethan pressed his face against the cool window, his eyes wide with amazement as he took in the sight before him. He had seen planets before, of course, pictures, videos, and the occasional brief visit, but nothing like this. The world below him was alive with colors and movement, a beautiful blend of vibrant greens, deep blues, and sparkling whites. Lyra glanced at him, her smile a quiet acknowledgement of his awe. "This is Zeroth," she said, her voice filled with pride. "My home." Zeroth was nothing like Earth. The landscape stretched out in endless hills and lush forests, while towering structures made of glass and metal rose above the trees. The air shimmered with an unusual clarity, and the distant mountains looked like they were made of smooth white stone, reflecting the light of two nearby suns. As the ship drew closer to the surface, Ethan could see signs of civilization. Gleaming cities, roads that seemed to pulse with light, and clusters of people moving through the streets. But even more striking than the cities was the planet's atmosphere, calm, serene, and peaceful. It was nothing like the chaotic, industrialized worlds he had imagined. The ship touched down in a large open field just outside one of the cities. The landing was smooth, almost too smooth, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat as the final touch of the engines quieted. He couldn't believe how far they had come. From a quiet colony to a strange, beautiful world in just a matter of days. "We're here," Lyra said, her tone light and calm. She turned to Ethan, her eyes glowing with excitement. "Welcome to Zeroth." Ethan didn't answer immediately. His mind was still racing. He had only known Lyra for a short time, but already this place felt more like home than his own planet ever had. He stepped out of the ship, the cool air of Zeroth immediately hitting his skin. It smelled fresh, like a mix of flowers and earth after rain. The land around him was wide and open, with soft hills and patches of forest stretching as far as he could see. Lyra motioned for him to follow her, and he obeyed, feeling like a visitor in a completely new world. As they walked, she explained more about the planet and her people. "My people are called the Zerothians," she said. "We've always been a peaceful, advanced society, but for years we've been struggling with something." She paused, as if unsure how to continue. "Our world has become stagnant. We've lost our ability to think freely, to create. We've been following old traditions, clinging to the past, and it's holding us back. We need someone like you, someone with fresh ideas, someone who can help us break free." Ethan nodded, trying to absorb all the information. It wasn't exactly what he had expected, but the more Lyra spoke, the more he realized that her planet was not unlike Earth in some ways. People were struggling, there were challenges, and they needed help. As they walked into the city, Ethan's eyes widened at the sight of the buildings and the people. The structures were unlike anything he had seen on Earth. They were sleek and organic, designed to blend with nature, with curves that seemed to flow effortlessly from one shape to another. The people of Zeroth moved with purpose, their clothes simple yet elegant, and their expressions calm and thoughtful. They passed by groups of Zerothians, who stared at Ethan curiously. Some nodded at Lyra, while others looked at Ethan with a mix of surprise and curiosity. It was clear he was different, his clothes, his mannerisms, even the way he walked, but they didn't seem hostile, just intrigued. Lyra led him through the bustling streets, and Ethan couldn't help but feel like an outsider. He had always been just another face in a small colony, but here he was an anomaly, an earthling in a world where he knew nothing, surrounded by people who seemed to live completely different lives. Still, there was something about this place that felt right. The beauty of it, the peacefulness, the feeling of potential. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Finally, Lyra stopped in front of a large building made of translucent material, where the light seemed to shimmer and shift with every passing moment. "This is the council hall," she said. "It's where decisions are made for our people. It's also where we'll begin your role here. You'll meet with the leaders of my world and help us make the changes we so desperately need." Ethan took a deep breath. He wasn't sure if he was ready for such an important task, but the weight of Lyra's words echoed in his mind. He was here for a reason. He didn't know exactly how he would help, but he felt like this was what he was meant to do. Ethan stood in the grand hall, surrounded by the leaders of Zarath. The council chamber was vast, with walls that seemed to stretch endlessly upward, made from a material that shimmered in the light. Above, a translucent ceiling allowed the soft glow of the twin suns to filter in, casting a peaceful, warm light across the room. But despite the beauty of the surroundings, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Lyra stood beside him, her presence calm but firm. The Zarothian leaders, a group of men and women, sat at a long table in front of them. Their expressions were unreadable, their eyes watching Ethan carefully. Lyra had explained that these were the most powerful people on Zarath, and the fate of the planet rested in their hands. "You're our guest, Ethan," Lyra had told him before they entered the hall. "But you're also our hope. We need your perspective. Don't be afraid to speak your mind." But as the leaders began to speak, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. They spoke in a calm, controlled manner, discussing the state of the planet, the struggles they faced, and the reasons why change seemed impossible. But as the conversation continued, something began to feel wrong. Ethan listened carefully, trying to understand. There was talk of stagnation, of rigid traditions that had prevented growth. Lyra's words about their lost ability to think freely echoed in his mind. Yet it became clear that not all of the leaders seemed ready for change. Some of them, their faces stern and determined, spoke of maintaining the old ways, of keeping the peace by sticking to the tried and true methods that had kept their world stable for generations. One of the older leaders, a tall man with silver hair, looked at Ethan with a cool, calculating gaze. "You speak of change, human," he said, his voice low but strong. "But how can we trust someone who knows nothing of our ways? You bring new ideas, but how do we know they will work here? We've had centuries of peace. What makes you think your fresh perspective will not destroy everything we've built?" Ethan felt a surge of frustration. He hadn't come here to destroy anything. He had come to help. But how could he explain that to these people who seemed so set in their ways? He glanced at Lyra, hoping for some support, but she stood silently by his side, letting him speak for himself. "Change doesn't have to mean destruction," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's about progress. You've built something amazing here, but nothing lasts forever. If you keep doing the same things, you'll be left behind. Sometimes, you need to let go of the past to make room for the future." The room was silent for a moment. The leaders exchanged looks, some nodding slightly, others frowning. Ethan could feel the tension in the air. They weren't used to hearing someone from the outside speak so frankly about their way of life. To them, tradition was everything. And to question that was unthinkable. Finally, the silver-haired leader spoke again. "And what of your people, human? You speak of progress, but is your world any better off? Do you come from a place of strength or weakness? What makes you think you have anything to offer us?" Ethan paused. He had expected questions like this. He had never claimed that Earth was perfect. But he knew that human resilience, the ability to adapt, to fight for survival, to push beyond the limits, was something Zarath needed. "My people are far from perfect," Ethan admitted. "We've made mistakes, countless mistakes, but we've learned from them. We've learned how to push forward, how to innovate. We've learned to be flexible and to think creatively when things go wrong. That's why we're still here. The room grew quiet once more. Ethan could tell that his words had made an impact, but whether it was enough to change their minds remained to be seen. The older leader's expression softened slightly, though he still seemed skeptical. Lyra stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence. Ethan speaks the truth. We don't have all the answers, but we have to try. We can't keep living in the shadow of our past mistakes. If we don't change, we risk losing everything we've built, and we can't afford to let that happen. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the leaders seemed to be considering her words, while others looked more stubborn, unwilling to accept that change might be necessary. Ethan knew that this wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't just fighting against the ideas of a few individuals. He was facing an entire society built on tradition, on the belief that stability could only be achieved by maintaining the status quo. He glanced at Lyra, who met his gaze with a look of quiet determination. They both knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix. But Ethan also knew that they had started something important, something that could bring real change to Zarath. The atmosphere in the council chamber was tense, and Ethan could feel it pressing down on him like a heavy weight. The meeting had taken a sharp turn after his words. Some of the leaders had shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. The silver-haired leader, the one who had spoken against him most, was now glaring at Ethan, as though he had personally insulted everything they had worked for. Lyra stood by him, her posture as calm and controlled as ever, but Ethan could see the determination in her eyes. She believed in him, and that gave him strength. But the battle for Zarath's future wasn't going to be easy, and Ethan knew that now more than ever. The meeting had stretched on for hours, and though some leaders were beginning to lean toward change, others were becoming more vocal in their opposition. The argument was clear. Zarathians had lived this way for centuries, and the idea of abandoning their traditions was too much for some to bear. "I'm telling you, Ethan, they are scared," Lyra whispered, leaning closer to him as the council debated loudly. Change means the unknown. To them, it's like tearing apart everything they've worked for. But we can't let that stop us. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the arguing leaders. He understood. Change was always met with resistance, especially when it threatened to shake up the very foundations of society. But what was the point of maintaining a way of life if it meant stagnation, if it meant they couldn't move forward? He turned to Lyra, his face serious. "How far are we willing to go, though? We can't just push them into change. If they don't want it, what do we do?" Lyra's eyes were steady, but there was a flicker of worry in them. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we can't afford to do nothing. If we don't act now, the old ways will continue, and my people will suffer for it. I didn't bring you here just to be a voice in the wind." Before Ethan could respond, the silver-haired leader spoke again, his voice loud and cutting through the room. "This is madness," he declared. "You think we should abandon centuries of tradition for the sake of change that no one truly understands. You are not Zarothian, human. You cannot understand the consequences of such a reckless move." Ethan's pulse quickened, but he stood firm. "I understand more than you think," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "I understand what it's like to hold on to the past because it feels safe. But I also understand what it's like to be stuck, to be afraid of taking the next step. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to risk everything. Just trust that the future is worth fighting for." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Ethan thought he had won them over. But then the silver-haired leader spoke again, his voice full of warning. "We've tolerated enough of this. If you continue to push for this so-called change, there will be consequences. Zarath has its laws, and if you choose to act against them, you may find yourself an enemy of the state." Ethan's heart sank. This was no longer a simple matter of convincing people. It had become a dangerous game. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. If they went against the leaders who opposed them, they would risk everything. The peace of Zarath, their future here, It all hung in the balance. Lyra stepped forward, her face hardening with resolve. "Then so be it," she said, her voice like steel. "If that's the cost of saving my people, then I'm ready to pay it. We cannot let fear rule us any longer." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as the leaders exchanged glances, some visibly shaken by Lyra's words, others seething with anger. Ethan could see the situation spiraling out of control. The conflict between those who wanted change and those who wanted to preserve the status quo was deeper than he had realized. The tension was now palpable, and the council wasn't just divided. It was on the verge of fracturing completely. As the debate continued, Ethan knew that things were escalating fast. The longer they stayed here, the more dangerous it would become. He could see it in the way the leaders glared at one another, the way some of them were already making subtle gestures as if preparing for something. Ethan turned to Lyra, his voice low. "We have to act fast. If we wait any longer, it might be too late." Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time since they had arrived on Zeroth, Ethan saw a flicker of uncertainty in them. But she nodded. "You're right," she said. "It's time to make our choice. We can either give in to fear and live with the consequences, or we can push forward and take the risk." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their decision pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of an entire planet, and the path they chose today could either shape Zeroth's future or destroy it. The silence that followed Ethan's words seemed to stretch on forever. The council sat motionless, their faces a mix of disbelief, fear, and anger. Lyra stood beside Ethan, her posture straight, but her eyes revealed the weight of the decision they had made. This was it, the moment that would determine the future of Zeroth. The silver-haired leader, who had opposed them from the start, broke the silence first. His voice was filled with cold resolve. "You dare defy the laws of Zeroth." He spat, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think you can change everything with a few empty promises." Ethan stood tall, though he could feel the heat of their glares. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He couldn't back down now. "I'm not making promises," he said, his voice steady. "I'm offering you a chance to be something more, to grow beyond the limits you've placed on yourselves." Lyra stepped forward, her voice firm. "We've given enough. My people have suffered in silence for too long. We're done living in fear of change. We'll fight for our future, whether you support us or not." The council leaders exchanged nervous glances. Some of them looked troubled, while others remained unmoved, their faces set in stone. Ethan could feel the room teetering on the edge of something dangerous. There was no turning back now. The choices they had made had placed them in a corner, and the consequences were beginning to reveal themselves. The silver-haired leader leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You've chosen a dangerous path, Lyra," he said, his voice low and threatening. "And now you'll face the consequences. You've pushed us too far." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had known the risks when he decided to follow Lyra, but now, seeing the anger in the eyes of the leaders, he realized just how high the stakes were. This wasn't just about ideals and change anymore. This was about power, who would control the future of Zeroth, and who would be left behind. "We're not backing down," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You can't keep the planet in the past forever. If we don't change, we'll all be stuck in a world that's dying, that's fading. Is that what you want?" Lyra's eyes shone with determination. "We've seen what happens when we hold on too tightly to the old ways. Our world is stagnant. We need change, and we'll fight for it, no matter what it takes." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't a silence filled with doubt. It was a silence filled with understanding. Some of the leaders were beginning to see what Lyra and Ethan were saying. They could feel the truth in their words, but the old ways were hard to let go of, and not all of them were ready to accept it. The silver-haired leader stood slowly, his movements deliberate and powerful. "Then you leave us no choice," he said coldly. Zarath is a place of laws. If you choose to go against the established order, you will be considered enemies of the state. We will not allow you to destroy everything we have built. Ethan's heart sank, but he didn't show it. This was the moment where everything changed. They had made the decision, and now they had to face the consequences. Lyra's hand found his, and for a brief moment, they stood together, united in their resolve. If we're going to change things, Lyra said softly, we have to be willing to make sacrifices. We can't let fear hold us back anymore. We have to be willing to risk everything. Ethan nodded. He didn't know what would happen next, but he understood the truth in her words. They had already come so far, and there was no turning back now. The silver-haired leader's eyes hardened as he turned to the other members of the council. This is your last chance, Lyra, he said, his voice thick with warning. If you choose to follow this path, we will have no choice but to act against you. Lyra took a deep breath, her voice calm but resolute. Then we'll face whatever comes next. Together. The council members were divided. Some seemed ready to stand with Lyra and Ethan, recognizing the need for change. Others, however, remained firm in their opposition, unwilling to let go of their power. The room was filled with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. This was no longer just a political debate. It was a fight for the future of Zarath, and Ethan and Lyra had chosen their side. As they walked out of the council chamber, the weight of their decision settled over them. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, that they would face resistance, and possibly even violence. But they also knew that they couldn't stand by and let Zarath continue down a path of stagnation. I don't know what's going to happen next, Ethan said quietly, his voice heavy with the burden of the choice they had made. Lyra squeezed his hand, her gaze unwavering. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Zarath. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light across the land, and for the first time since arriving on this strange planet, Ethan felt a sense of peace. It was the calm before the storm, but it was also a reminder of why they had come here in the first place, to change everything. The council had reacted with fury when Lyra and Ethan refused to back down. They had declared them enemies of the state, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the fight for Zarath's future was lost. But something had shifted in the air, something that had been building for a long time. The people of Zarath, those who had been quietly supporting Lyra's vision of change, began to speak up. They had seen the cracks in the system. They had felt the weight of their stagnant society. And they were ready for something different. We've made a difference, Lyra said quietly, her voice full of emotion. People are starting to listen. The fight's not over yet, but we've shown them that change is possible. Ethan nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. But will it be enough? Will they really fight for it? Lyra's eyes sparkled with a quiet confidence. Yes, we've already planted the seed, and it's beginning to grow. It won't be easy, but we've come too far to stop now. They turned back to the city, where groups of people were beginning to gather. There were whispers in the streets, murmurs of change spreading like wildfire. It wasn't just the supporters of Lyra anymore. More and more citizens were joining the cause, understanding that their future depended on breaking free from the traditions that had held them back for so long. Ethan could see it in their eyes, the hope, the determination. It was contagious. For the first time, he felt like they might actually succeed. He had come to Zarath not knowing what to expect, but now he knew one thing for sure. This world had a chance. It could become something greater, something better. As they walked through the streets, Lyra stopped and looked around, taking in the changes that were already starting to take shape. We've begun a revolution, Ethan. Not a violent one, but a quiet, powerful one. It will take time, but the people will lead it now. I just gave them the push they needed. Ethan smiled. He had never imagined he would be a part of something so important, so transformative. He was just a mechanic from a small colony, and yet here he was, standing beside the woman who had changed everything. He had been part of something bigger than himself, and it felt good. As they continued walking, They passed by a group of Zerothians, some of whom had once opposed Lyra's ideas. Now, they greeted her with nods of respect, even though the tension still hung in the air. The changes weren't going to come overnight, but every small victory counted. Lyra turned to him, her eyes softening as she spoke. "Thank you for believing in me, for believing in this world. I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. "I didn't believe in this world when I first came here," he admitted. "I thought it was too different from mine, too far removed. But now, I see what you see. This planet, these people, they deserve a chance to be free." Lyra smiled, squeezing his hand. "And they'll have that chance. Together, we've started something, and it won't end with us." They reached the central square, where a large gathering was taking place. People were speaking, sharing their ideas for the future. It was peaceful, organized, and full of energy. Ethan looked around at the faces in the crowd, seeing hope where once there had been fear. It was hard to believe this was the same world he had arrived on just weeks ago. Everything was different now, and the air seemed lighter, filled with the promise of change. Suddenly, a loud cheer broke out from the crowd, and Ethan turned to see people clapping and waving. It was a small celebration, but it was a powerful one. The people of Zeroth were beginning to believe again, beginning to see that they could shape their own future. Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion. The fight wasn't over, but it had begun. And as he looked at Lyra, he knew that they had made the right choice. They had risked everything for this moment, and now it was happening. Lyra turned to Ethan, her voice soft but full of certainty. "This is just the beginning. We've shown them what's possible, and now we have to make sure they follow through. But I know they will. The future it is in their hands now." Ethan nodded. "And I'll be here, with you, for whatever comes next." As the celebration continued around them, Ethan couldn't help but smile. He had come to Zeroth with nothing but questions, but now, for the first time, he could see the future clearly. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't matter. They had already started something powerful, and together, they would see it through.